Hey everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with D&D Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a murder hobo turning on his fellow that guy for doing something gross in Dungeons & Dragons. A story about an edgy player that doesn't have a clue, and much more. But first, if you like what I do here, I hope you consider hitting that like button and subscribing. And to help with that, here is a kitty. There we go. Now I think it's time to dive into some D&D horror stories. Murderhobo Saves the Day from Disgusting Goblin Wizard by Reddit user PhoenixOp102. I have been playing Dungeons & Dragons with my typical D&D group for years now, most of the time at my house. I had gotten used to all their quirks and playstyles. Two players in particular tended to be either the edgelord murder hobo or the cringy wannabe F-boy of the party, or both, and they tended to back each other's antics up. Well, this most recent campaign was set in a sort of modern Zelda-inspired post-apocalyptic world, so there was a medieval Renaissance feel, with some weirdly futuristic stuff splattered in there. The first murder hobo rolled up a goblin wizard. The second murder hobo rolled up a bugbear barbarian. I played as a tiefling rogue, and the other relevant player was a human bard. There were two other players who are not relevant to the story. We started this campaign about 5 months ago, and despite the antics of the bugbear barbarian and goblin wizard, things went relatively smoothly. During the campaign, we went on a reconnaissance mission to a secret facility that stretched from the surface world to the Underdark. It was also filled with hostile warforged and automatons. We had to go back to the nearby town to tell our allies what we found, so we could formulate a plan to retake it by a coordinated siege that would draw out the enemies. Goblin Wizard didn't like the strategy and preferred to raid, so he killed the town's leader with Bugbear Barbarian's help, and declared himself Emperor of the town, and demanded that they do the raid his way. This obviously didn't go over well. We became fugitives of the town, as the people rallied against us in defense of their leader. So we, the party, decided to take down the warforges and automatons in a more stealthy way by taking some alternative Underdark route to the secret room to shut down the warforged and automatons. Infiltrating this facility was very important, so we all threatened the Goblin Wizard and made it clear that if he does anything insane like that again, that interferes with our mission, the party will kill him. The one party member who stood by Goblin Wizard was of course Bugbear Barbarian. However, we still outnumbered them and could kill them both if they went too far. A few weeks after that, Human Bard's player's uncle and younger cousin were coming to visit. His cousin was 12 and was curious about Dungeons & Dragons, so he asked if he could play with us for the 3 sessions he'd be in town for. We were all cool with it, but the Dungeon Master warned us to tone down some of the content that wouldn't be appealing to new players or appropriate for children. We all agreed, and the cousin came as we were preparing to climb through the secret facility from the Underdark to the surface world, which would lead us to the secret room. He rolled up a drow paladin to fit with the Underdark theme. When we made it back to the surface world, we made it to the secret room, and it was filled with scientists. We were planning to sneak up on them and take them hostage to interrogate them, but Goblin Wizard, who was kind of drunk in real life, then forced us into combat by casting Fireball and killing the scientists. And you'll never guess who helped him. The rest of the party berated the Goblin Wizard and Bugbear Barbarian, although they were hesitant to kill them because there was a legitimate case for killing these scientists, because they controlled the warforged and automatons. There was, however, one scientist who was barely still alive. She was an elf, so we demanded that the murder hobos let her live, or we'd kill them both. Goblin Wizard then laughed and said, "No worries, I'm not gonna kill her," as he bound and gagged her. And then he said, "After I tie her up and gag her, I savor the feeble attempts to scream, rip off her coat, pull down my pants, and yank out my penis. And then..." The Dungeon Master then cuts him off and says, "No, just no." Goblin Wizard then says, Relax, I have telepathy so I can read her mind. Trust me, she wants it. Those are screams of desire. The Dungeon Master then says, There is a kid here, dumbass. The kid's cousin also jumped in and said, Yeah, seriously, cut it out, you're not funny. Goblin Wizard then just said, Cover his ears then. The kid then just says, It's okay, you don't need to worry about me. I play Grand Theft Auto, so I'm used to it. Goblin Wizard then says, See, he doesn't care. Now, where were we with this filthy elf bitch, and her soon-to-be violated holes? Then something happened that surprised me. The Bugbear Barbarian put his murder-hobo tendencies to good use and said, I grab my war axe and chop that effing goblin's head off like I'm snapping a spaghetti noodle. The Dungeon Master then promptly said, Alrighty then, Goblin is dead, and now I'm getting tired, so it's time for everyone to go home. I then whisked Goblin's drunk ass into my car, before he could even think to protest, and drove him home without saying a word to him. On our group text the next day, Goblin Wizard's player tried to apologize, and said that he had way too much to drink before the session, and thought that he was being funny in an edgy way. The Dungeon Master said, Yeah, you're still banned for the foreseeable future. Goblin Wizard's player understood, and personally apologized to the kid's cousin, again our friend. But he was, understandably, angrier than the Dungeon Master was, and didn't want to talk to him at all. The kid enjoyed the game overall, and he has since gone home, although he initially tried to advocate for Goblin to come back, as I think he felt responsible for his banning. After that, we have gone back to semi-normal Dungeons & Dragons, albeit without Goblin. TLDR, drunk idiot player tries to pull a disgusting move on an elf and claim that she, quote, wants it, despite being bound and gagged, all while a kid is playing with us. His murder-hobo buddy then kills him, and he is subsequently banned. Yeah, it definitely seems like those two players were your dictionary definition of murder-hobo. Killing a town leader and claiming to be the new emperors of the town says as much. It's understandable that the Dungeon Master would request that those players tone down on the more mature themes, since one of the players' young cousin was going to be joining them. You would think that Goblin would have had some forethought to maybe not drink during those sessions, but he did, thus thought it was appropriate to try to perform SA on an elf captive. Now, as far as mechanics with PvP goes, the Dungeon Master definitely weighed that, as he just stated that the Barbarian's attack was an insta-kill, but I can kinda see where he was coming from, and that he just wanted to end that session. But as far as permabanning Goblin's player from the game, I think that might be a bit harsh. Hopefully, the player whose cousin was visiting can eventually forgive Goblin's player, as they did seem to be genuinely remorseful. Maybe after a bit of time, Goblin's player can eventually rejoin. Though, what are your thoughts on this one? Let's move on. The Very Brief Ride of the Cowboy Ninja by Reddit user Horny But Tired. It's fall, 1994. I know specifically when this was, cause it was at one of the colleges I flunked out of, and I was only there that one semester. Anyway, the thing to remember is that this was right smack in the era of super edgy comics, and I was running a street-level, no-power superhero game for a bunch of other people in the dorm. So, naturally, someone made a super edgelord character. Though, one catch. The dude who made the character was as clueless as they come, so his concept of edgy was unique, let's say. I can't remember what the character was actually called, but everyone else referred to him as Cowboy Ninja, which annoyed this player to no end. He wore a black bodysuit and a duster, and cowboy boots with spurs, great for stealth, and used 2 katanas as weapons. He was a blood-soaked vigilante out to disembowel crime, or, as it happened, anyone who stumbled into his path. See, of the many problems with Cowboy Ninja was the fact that his player was a total dope who never had any idea what was going on. The first time he played the character, I described how he came across a mugger menacing a couple of people in matching outfits. They were line dancers. I was trying to be funny. And he not only sliced open the mugger, but he killed the mugger's victims because this quote still lives in my brain. They were wearing matching clothes, so they were clearly gang members. Later, his character had just finished filleting some actual gang members, and the police arrived and naturally told this bloody lunatic to drop his weapons and freeze. So he murdered all of them because, again, burned into my brain, I'm the good guy, so if they're pointing guns at me, they must be secretly working for the bad guy. It was not yet explained who the bad guy might be. I certainly hadn't at that time introduced any mastermind villains who might be orchestrating things. My favorite had to be the time the character went to Central Park and started accosting civilians and violently interrogating them about the major drug operation in town. Not any particular civilians, just anyone he happened to come across. He seemed to feel this was a very productive way of gaining intelligence about crime in the city. Anyway, this kind of thing continued, which was ridiculous enough, but the two best parts were A, that Cowboy Ninja actively avoided the rest of the group, stalking and observing them, but never interacting, and B, after hearing reports of a sword-wielding lunatic menacing the city, the Cowboy Ninja started trying to investigate and catch the, quote, Katana Killer, which, to be clear, was him. He had no idea. He genuinely thought that there was some other dude out there killing people with katanas. He absolutely did not recognize the full and detailed descriptions of the things he himself had done, sometimes in the same session. He was super excited to find this guy and confront him for killing people, which was apparently bad, even though he was literally doing exactly the same stuff that he was chasing the Katana Killer for. I don't know, man. This effing guy. In the end, the rest of the group eventually apprehended the Katana Killer, aka our Cowboy Ninja, which was the first time they'd laid eyes on him, since he'd spent the last half-dozen sessions hiding from the other players, waiting for a dramatic moment to introduce his character. The whole time, the player of Cowboy Ninja genuinely thought he'd been framed by the real Katana Killer, and that this was the beginning of some epic plot arc for his character, rather than the last time he'd be seen in play. I gotta hand it to him. He did keep things interesting, but I'll be thankful never to have that kind of player in my group ever again. And this dude was in college, you say? It makes me wonder how he even got past high school. To have his character act in such an edgy way, where he would murder hobo anyone that stood in his way, and then think that a description of a killer matching his description and acts that he committed is someone else framing him, is a whole level of daft that I barely have read about. I wonder if Cowboy Ninja ever realized looking back on it that he was indeed the real Katana Killer. I also wonder if he made another character and kept playing with OP and the others. On to the next one. The Chris Aspen Incident. Submitted to the D&D Doge subreddit by Reddit user Willowa. This is an old one, but probably the worst story I've got. Content warning for rape and child SA. Thankfully, all in game, but still. So just out of high school, and still early in my D&D career, my group collectively made the mistake of letting our problem character, let's call him Josh, run a game. It was a pirate campaign pitched to us as Robin Hood but with pirates. There was a lot that was bad about this game, and it might be worth sharing some of the less bad stories sometime. My old pal Ben, who lived out of town, was now in town for the weekend visiting family, and we all agreed to let him play a one-off character who could maybe be used as an NPC after the fact. Enter Christopher Aspenberry, Chris Aspen for short, a 10-year-old half-faced sorcerer with a talent for mending things. We picked him up at a local tavern, where he was basically using a fake ID to get drinks, and brought him onto the ship, getting him introduced to the player characters and all the major NPCs. Then, Josh declares that an NPC bard that none of us knew was on the ship approached the group, cast some kind of spell on Chris that apparently charmed him without a save, which was extra nonsense since we were all level 14, and leads him away through a dimensional door into a BDSM dungeon. Josh then thankfully did a fade to black, but declared that Chris spent all night having kinky sex with this bard, and that it was the best night of his life. The rest of us were completely stunned. Another player spoke up, reminding Josh that Chris was 10, a fact that we all knew, both in and out of game, though Josh just said something to the effect of, "Whatever, it's funny," and the game just went on as if nothing happened. Josh would be ousted at the end of the following session, with this incident being part of the reason why. But honestly, I should have kicked him out of my house on the spot. Well, that certainly is a way to introduce a guest character, with that way being one of the most effed up ways. It was good that someone called the Dungeon Master out on it, and his excuse of it, quote, being funny, makes me question this dude's sense of humor, because I don't see how a minor character being magically tricked into that has any type of humor attached to it at all. And by the sounds of it, OP had to find a new Dungeon Master after that. Let's move on. The First Time I Kicked Out a Player, by Reddit user Frothing Gnome. A couple years ago, after a long D&D drought, I opened a public game at my friendly local game store. A pirate survival island adventure game. There were a couple problem players, but no one like Sam. "No evil characters," I said. "All right," everyone said. We began session 1, and Sam was playing a dwarven rogue. "You're on a ship," I said. "It's storming. Captain Jensen." "You know that's not how that works, right?" asks Sam. "What?" I said. "You can't have a captain who's an ensign." Jensen, I said. Sam looked at me with something like contempt, but we continued. "Captain Jensen is yelling at you all, over the crash of the waves and pelt of the rain, that this is no ordinary storm. If you lubbers have a drop of salt in your veins, your help might mean the difference between life and death." And as he speaks, the sea begins to swell off the starboard side. A glistening form arises. Sam rolls his eyes and lets out a loud groan. "A kraken? Seriously? Seriously?" I glare back. Yes, a glistening octopus-like creature, half as big as the ship, arises from the depths, and lashes the ship's deck with its taloned tentacles. The players leap to defend the ship, except for Sam. "I'm not getting paid for this. This is the sailor's job," he says. I inform Sam that his character is aware that her involvement in the battle is a matter of her own survival. He finally gives in, firing a hand crossbow at the tentacles that are not engaged by allies, never triggering the rogue sneak attack dice, and getting pissed off that he's never doing anything impactful. The ship eventually wrecks, and the players stagger ashore. They spend the next few days interacting with the nearby prison colony, during which time I discovered Sam's character was in fact chaotic evil and had no background. "What's the point of a background?" Sam asked. "I don't need one." I informed him that it gave his character several of her skills, as well as being, you know, the way a character hooks into the game world. "Whatever," he said. If this had been a private game, I might have kicked Sam out right there. Had this been a public game that I run today, I certainly would have kicked him out then. But this was a public game, intended for me to get to know players new to me, so I could invite the good ones to a later private game. And I had never kicked someone out before, so I foolishly let Sam continue playing. Sam later tried to steal the MacGuffin from an NPC, failing to beat the perception rolls of literally the entire party who were staring at it at the time, and became further pissed off at his inability to do anything. He kept doing things like that throughout the next 3 sessions, selfish things that ignored how the rules actually worked, and just assuming that he would succeed at anything his character attempted. He eventually became bored with playing the game in general, and would take to walking over to the magic players when it wasn't his turn in combat. He seemed to think it inconceivable that enemies would attack his character while he wasn't at the table, and yelled at the cleric for not healing wording his character every time she dropped as a result of being a frontline assassin rogue. The final straw came when the party entered the final room of a dungeon, finding the mummified corpse of a gigantic vampire bat god tied down with golden chains. The party knew by this point that it was imperative that they keep the god contained, but that if they had solved the puzzle of the room, they could extract the treasure it was guarding without breaking the chains. After a couple minutes of the party engaging with the puzzle, Sam's character grabbed a magic sacrificial knife and deliberately severed the linchpin of the trap, freeing the god. A mad escape dash out of the collapsing temple later, Sam's character looked up at the mummy flying through the sky and asked if the god would give him any prize for freeing it. When I said no, Sam became incensed and left the table to watch the magic players for the rest of the session. I asked Sam afterward if he was planning on coming back to the game the following session. He said yes, so I asked him not to come back. As Sam was my roommate, it was an awkward drive home. A little backstory. Sam has about 10 years D&D seniority on me. Back in the day, he had a bunch of other local jack-offs playing some incredibly adversarial D&D, where the DM tried his best to slaughter the players, and the players did their best to tweak, twist, and warp the fabric of the rules to beat him back. I didn't know this until after this whole incident, and heard it all from another of the players in his old group. But apparently, back in the 3.5 days, that's just how they played the game. Sam and I effectively had different expectations out of the game, and at that point, I wasn't using session zeros. In addition to this, Sam was at this point trying to balance working second shift while having a social life during the day. This isn't an excuse, but this also wasn't how Sam acted as a matter of course. When I confronted Sam about his behavior in game and asked him to leave, he said it hurt a lot, but he didn't blow up or have a fit of rage. He said he was sorry, and to my surprise, didn't ask to be allowed back into the game, but asked for another chance to prove that he could be a good player in the future. I said sure, but he approaches most gaming through a very video gamey perspective, so I don't really plan on approaching him to come to a game on my own terms. We haven't played D&D together since, and we're not roommates anymore, but Sam and I are still friends. He's a selfless and honest person from moment to moment, and I love watching anime and going on hikes and stuff with him. But I know better now than to play competitive games with him. Now, there can be instances where two people's playstyles don't mesh well, and that's fine and all, but the way that the rogue was going about things was still kinda rude to say the least. Like refusing to fight the Kraken at first, and not to mention his reaction to it, all the way to just releasing the god from its chains, while the other players were trying to figure out the puzzle. Then, out of game, just up and walked away when it wasn't his turn in order to watch other people play Magic the Gathering. So, while the dude sounds like a chill guy to hang out with, he sounds like a nightmare in competitive or cooperative gaming, so it's probably for the best that OP never played Dungeons & Dragons with him again. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.